Hello. This is Family Electric Ghost. I have the Sound of Modesty on, right, Yvonne?
Hello.
How
Yes,
you
that's me.
So, I like to always do a little introduction.
Go for it.
So, I'm Family Electric Ghost. I'm an indie song producer and electronic musician, and I've been interviewing artists around the world since 2018. And Anchor FM is part of Spotify, and we have about 23,000 fans right now. So we're glad to have you on the program. You're calling in from London?
Yep, that's right.
Great. So you're going to art school, music school, right?
Yeah, up in Leeds. Exciting stuff.
One of my favorite albums of all time is The Who's Live at Leeds.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So let me get into all the questions I sent you.
Awesome.
So when did you first get into music? Like, what age did you actually get into it?
Well, I'd say it started when I was 5, when my parents decided that I should be taking piano lessons with my sisters. So I was classically trained in that, and then I got into violin as well at a later time. But I didn't really get into like popular music with like guitars and drums until I was like just starting high school, really, with drums. So I'd say that's when that all kicked off.
That's awesome. So you were like a teenager when you got into the drums. I saw that you actually, you learned piano, but you also have on your bio that you learned drums, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, before I learned the drums, I was very much into like the stuff you hear on the charts, like pop music and all that.
Yeah.
But then when I got into drums and I also met my friends, I also started like hearing like all this indie music that I'd never heard before because, charts and stuff. Yeah. And that just opened a whole new world for me.
That's interesting because I'll show my age. I'm 52. I grew up with college radio, right? So I was around to hear like REM on IRS records, their first stuff before they went to Warner's. And, I used to listen to like Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, because college radio was really great because it didn't play the pop music. It played bands like REM or bands like The Replacements or bands like, the Velvet
stuff.
Underground. Yeah, the stuff. So then I got an appreciation because I was classically trained on the clarinet.
Oh, that's amazing.
But you can't really write music on the clarinet. Well, you can write classical music. But so I started, with a CZ101 Casio synthesizer, and then I moved up to a Roland D5, which was like a dumbed down version of a D50, if you know their history. But that was back in the 80s. And I just really was always inspired by a punk aesthetic, even though I'm a keyboard player. So I love bands like The Clash and the Sex Pistols and Joy Division and new wave stuff. So it's interesting, like you said, you started classical and then you got the drums that kind of brought you into that indie world, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, totally.
So you've been working on music since you were very young then, from doing, classical to, getting into the indie scene. So when did you realize that you wanted to write your own music? Because when I talk to a lot of artists, it's like there's certain artists that they never choose to do their own music. And then artists that become singer-songwriters or producers and composers. What made you feel like you had that bent to go that way?
Well, I'd say that if people know me, then they know that I'm kind of a control freak and that I kind of just want control over everything in my life that's creative. So when I was in my band, Once Week Won't Kill You, and I was drumming for them, we were doing covers and all the sorts, like how bands start out before they develop their sound.
Cover bands, how you start usually.
Yeah. And then I really enjoyed doing the covers, but there was part of me that was like, I wish I'd just do my own stuff so then I could, have like the final creative say on it instead of just copying someone else's work. So I sat down at my piano. This was like Christmas of 2016. And I was like, okay, today I'm finally going to write a song. And I ended up writing a really horribly, horribly cheesy Christmas song. And that's sort of how my songwriting career started.
Now, I'm a keyboard player, so I have a big love for like synthesizers, and keyboards. I decided, like I said, I started on clarinet, and I was like, well, I can't really write songs like this. And I was in a band as well. And I was kind of like the songwriter for the band. Luckily, because I was the keyboardist. So I was able to write like all the parts. Because I could write bass lines, I could write chords, I could write, everything. I could even do the drums because I had synth. So I'd come to the practice and I had these sketches already done, and then I wouldn't be like Pete Towns. I wouldn't force everybody to do exactly what I want, the way I wrote it. I would say, well, the bass player can interpret it and do a better line. The drummer's going to take this drum machine line and make it way better, but it gives them an idea where we want to go.
Oh, totally. I mean,
that's what. Yeah, and that was back before you had anything other than a Tascam. There was no DAW, so I'd have a Tascam 4-tracker, and I put it down on that. But now everybody's got DAWs. But yeah, it's interesting because I think songwriters either start with a piano or a guitar. Have you done like both? Have you wrote songs on a piano and a guitar, and now probably on a DAW?
Yes, I started with piano, and then I sort of transitioned to guitar because that was easier for me to sort of like write rhythmically, whereas piano was more like everything was a ballad, at least for the first like maybe few years. And then I transitioned into just like doing like melodies in my head with just singing them, sometimes even playing the violin to sort of figure out some nice ostinatos and all that jazz. Yeah,
that's
but
cool.
I think that's what's so great about like collaborating with other musicians though, because then they come up with stuff based on your stuff that you would have never imagined.
Yeah, that's like one thing. Is because one of my big frustrations as a keyboard player, I wanted to learn guitar, and my brother was able to pick up a guitar. He had a Fender Strat, and he just picked it up. And I tried for like 2 years, and I was like, well, I can't really get it. I can't get it for some reason. But I was able to pick up the piano, and then I was able to get into keyboards. And I kind of, because I was a frustrated, keyboardist that wanted to be a guitar player.
Oh.
I found a way to make my keyboards sound like guitar. And I found a way to be actually write for guitars that normally like keyboard players, like you would tend to go with a ballad. You would tend to write like the Journey type of song or like an Eagle ballad or something like that. But I was always like, I wanted to write like Hendrix, I wanted to play like Page. I wanted to be like, or if I wanted to do anything else, I'd try to bring in Coltrane or Sun Ra or Davis into it. So that was always trying to make it sound not like a keyboard. It's like something else.
I totally feel that. Like
Yeah,
when I started piano, I was listening to, I think it was like Neutral Milk Hotel, a bit of Joy Division as well, like Modest Mouse, like the really hard guitar stuff. And I was just like fiddling away at my keys, trying to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, Disorder is like I spent a lot of time trying to get my Roland and my Moog to do Disorder, because like I love the way that song is structured, and to me it was like I love the Clash, I love the Sex Pistols, but Joy Division really kind of I zoned in on it because it was like, okay, it was like low like Kraftwerk, but it's more post punk and it's kind of this goth kind of new wave thing that New Order became. But it's kind of this intersection between this kind of stark kind of production, which I always like. I kind of like that kind of production. Maybe you can hear that in the Ghost, but so what are your influences? I know that you have Bjork and some other people down. I actually hear like Laurie Anderson and Suzanne Vega, but maybe you can talk more about your influences.
Yeah, so I'd say like whenever people ask me this question, I list my top 3, which is Mitski. She's currently in the indie rock scene. Bjork. I mean, we all know Bjork, so no need to explain that. And Regina Spektor as well.
Oh yeah. I hear her, but I also hear a lot of like Suzanne Vega. I don't know if you ever got into her.
I don't think I know her.
Yeah, Suzanne Vega had a hit in the 80s. She was an indie musician. She had a song called Luca. Luca was her big hit. And if you ever go listen to Luca, your way you sing, if you have never heard it, it's kind of weird. You've kind of picked up her style. She's like a singer-songwriter, does these very evocative personal stories. Luca is actually about domestic abuse. And it was a hit. It was a top 10 hit, but she never really had anything after that. But she was an electronic artist, but she also played guitar. and
That's
that was
interesting.
more of a guitar focused song, but it had electronic little blips and beeps around it. But yeah, it was just you really sound not like you're trying to sound like her, but I could see you're in the same space that she was in,
Oh, that's
which is really
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, I'll
Really
have to
cool.
check her out, Suzanne Vega.
Yeah, she's really cool. It was it kind of shows my age. It was big. She had a big top 10 hit in from her album called Solitude Standing. It was called Luca, and it's a pretty cool song.
Awesome.
Yeah, another big song called Tom's Diner. It's been remade a couple times, but yeah, so that's cool. So your writing style is we would say it's electronica or synth wave or kind of indie, alternative. Because I hear like a lot of different things. Like some of your older records, I hear like the guitar, and I hear the synths, but it's not the same for every song. You've got different styles.
Yeah. So usually, whenever someone asks me the question, I go indie alternative pop rock. And I just hope that covers all bases. But
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
say, like, recently I've been really sort of just dipping my toes into a lot of different genres to sort of find what my sound is. Because although I most identify with writing like in the alternative genre, because alternative is such like a broad term that can encompass so many different styles.
yeah.
I think that like I've been dipping into a lot of electronic and a lot of like J-pop elements as well in my more recent stuff, which is still to come out. So
Yeah. I started a little bit of J-pop. I hear the electronic. Like I'm a big modular synthesis. I'm kind of a DAW-less recorder producer because I kind of grew up, like I said, with the Tascam, and when the DAWs came around, I kind of restricting, and I kind of like even though it's like it opens up a lot, it like opened up like too much, and so
oh yeah.
I like the idea. Like I have modes, like I have grandmothers and mother 32s and DFAMs, and the thing about those instruments is they have limitations, but the limitations within those limitations of like, oh, I can't MIDI control it on the grid exactly the way I maybe want to. You control it with the like the surface controls on an analog synth. And if you've ever gotten into them, but they're kind of like playing like aspects of a real instrument. And if you go into a DAW, you're on the grid on your computer, you can't grab the ladder filter and turn it and turn another knob at the same time and put a CV line into another thing. The kind of like point in time expression that you can capture on tape, but it's hard to capture as a MIDI control because you're actually changing the tone of the instrument in real time. And some of those things you can't capture unless you like record it in real time. And I've always been very much a person that likes to do that kind of experimentation, like you know. But I know today there's a lot of capability with the DAWs, but I like the kind of rawness of analog in the tradition of like the original electronic musicians. But so when you record with electronic, are you primarily focused on hardware sense or DAWs or software sense?
Well, I don't have much hardware right now since I'm still a student, so I'm slowly just growing my collection. But yeah, I'm mostly working through a door right now.
So in school, do you have access to like hardware sense?
A few, yeah, but I haven't really dipped my toes into there yet because I'm a part of me is kind of scared to go that far because I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing with the door.
Yeah, it's just a different type of thing. I would always recommend any musician that's a singer songwriter if you once you dive, if they're kind of intimidating, because there's so many things on them, they look like you shouldn't touch them.
Mm.
but like once you actually as a musician, and especially since you're going to school, there's so many musical theories you can work out on these machines that I always recommend people if they get access to one, you should try them as much as you can.
Oh, definitely. Now that this coronavirus thing has happened, as soon as school opens up, I'm there.
Yeah. That kind of is limiting because that's one of the things I talked to a lot of bands in the last couple of weeks, and some of them were on the way to a recording studio, and now they can't do it. And so some of them are happy that they had invested in their own home studios, and actually do have gear where they could actually still put down a lot, and others are like, oh wow, we kind of assumed we could always go to the studio, and they're kind of rethinking, what their approach should be.
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, I have friends who are completely like cut off from music because they've completely like relied on like school facilities and stuff, and it's just dreadful.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, I mean, some of it is like if you have a Mac and a MIDI keyboard, you can still do a lot in main stage, or you can do stuff in FL Studio. But, if you were depending on actually going to a full recording board and using, the instruments in the studio, there's a lot of bands I've talked to, like, what, they're kind of dependent on using the equipment in like studios in California or London or wherever they are, and then they can't get to them. And so they've had to try to figure out how to navigate, and some of them are doing like live streams on Twitch and Facebook with acoustic guitars and trying to do kind of like unplugged performances
Yeah, yeah.
to
I've
kind
seen
of
that
get
a lot.
to engage their fans, let the fans know they're still around. um, so have you played live with the work you do as your Sound of Modesty, or are you just getting ready to do that?
I've played live a couple of times in my hometown, but I haven't really had an official headline as of yet since I'm still working on releasing my debut album. But
Mm-hmm.
I do have a upcoming show coming up.
Cool.
On well, the date hasn't been rescheduled yet because of thanks COVID. But I'll be supporting Josh Aitken at LS6 in Leeds.
Cool.
Yeah.
So so that's actually what, in London,
No, up in Leeds.
in Leeds. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, it's like it's hard to get. Like I've been starting to talk to some bookers, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to do anything because there's still a lot of places that are still locked down. Um, and a lot of places in the U.S. they're like music is like the last thing they're going to allow.
Oh yeah.
They're like, oh no, we're not doing that. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I find it's quite ironic that. Hello. Hello. Hi. Sorry, that's my mom.
that's that's okay.
Yeah. As I was saying, I find it quite ironic that even though like the arts in education have had like the least funding, like just generally like in the US and the UK, like the arts are what people are turning to now to stay sane.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, so many bands are engaging their fans. On Instagram, I see live streams all the time. I've been doing it myself, and it's like that's how people get through with music. Bands been releasing albums that they maybe weren't going to release, and they're just putting them out. And they're engaging with their fans. I mean, I saw George Clinton from Funkadelic with Snoop Dogg on a live Instagram, and they were just talking for like an hour
That's
to
great.
their fans, and it was just really cool to see them as like real people in their houses just talking.
Yeah.
And it was funny because Snoop Dogg was like such a big fan of Parliament that he was just like being a fanboy to George, and he was like, it's like he's a big star in his own right, but George is like a big funk icon like James Brown, and he would seem like he was like such a fan, even though he's an artist in his own right. So it's interesting to see that kind of dynamic. Um, yeah, you get to see a lot of interesting things now because of this situation. People have to modify. So I think I'll ask the questions like, so do you have a strategy because of what's going on? Have you decided, well, maybe I should make more videos, or I should do live online events, or work with people who are doing online festivals? Have you looked into that?
Well, my strategy going into COVID at the moment is that I've just been working on finishing my album. Since I don't really have like my bandmates anymore or like a proper studio, I've just been sort of trying to figure out how to do that and working a lot more on my social media presence now that I have all this time on my hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, are you thinking that you would engage your fans in like, just like unplug things, or just like showing them who you are, or maybe reading off lyrics? I've seen all different strategies of people are like, oh, I'm going to discuss my lyrics, or I'm going to show people like a demo, or I'm going to, so this different strategies to like engage.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, aside from obviously releasing more music, I'd say like my biggest strategy at the moment is to just interact with people like on a personal level and just
Hmm.
get to know my fans better, really.
Yeah, because I've seen a band I know from Colorado called Tennis, and their lead singer was kind of just engaging and talking about cooking. Was talking about like how she had her favorite recipe, and she was talking about it for like a half hour, and it was like, but the fans were engaged because like, well, you know, they get to see her as a real person, not just the lead singer of the band, and that's kind of cool. So there's different ways you can engage. Like, well, even if you can't do, you know, X, you could do Y. You could do something else. So that's, you know, I think we're creative people, so we tend to find things out, find ways to get around.
Totally.
Um, so we talked about the process of how you record. So, what is your favorite digital audio workstation when you're working on your production?
On my production, I'd have to say Logic Pro X, only because that's the one I'm most comfortable with at the moment. Like I've dabbled in Ableton and a little bit of Pro Tools like in the past, but I think just because like the whole process of songwriting is, at least to me, about capturing a moment, and that can so easily slip away sometimes. I think that being able to get the idea down quickly, or at least translate it into like a DAW, is so important. So
Yeah, so like different approaches. Like I would just like my approach is I use like a digital recorder. I use a Zoom R24, which is a 24 track recorder, and it's kind of like having a tape machine. And one of the things with analog synths is like you kind of want to capture the tones or timbres because they you kind of run the tape. It's kind of like an old strategy back in the 70s when bands went to the studio. They just run the tape continuously because they didn't know what they were going to get, and then they go back and splice things and put things on top of each other. And I've kind of been a big I like doing recording like that, and later I'll go back and refine things and maybe bring it into a DAW. But I find that being able to continuously record on my instruments, like if you're at a piano or guitar, you can continuously record it and then pick the ideas out of like an hour long tape. And then you say, oh, I had the song idea here at 10 minutes into it or 20 minutes into it. And that's just the way I like to work. And I find DAWs sometimes like you can do that, but it tends to be you have to have like more complete thoughts, and you can experiment. But I just like the kind of jazz oriented style of recording. So when you use your DAW, do you have complete like musical ideas going into it, or you kind of work them out as you're doing a session?
well, it really depends on the song because it changes a lot of the time. Like sometimes I'll have like a song that I've completely realized and finished just like maybe on my guitar, and then I just do my best to translate it. Or sometimes like I'm just messing around in the door and I come up with this really like cool sounding thing, and I'm just like, oh my god, how can I realize this and make it the best possible thing it can be? So
Yeah, that's the cool. I mean, the things like sequencers. Like I'm a big fan of sequencers because like if you take a really a nice sequencer like a Beat Step Pro or like a Moog analog sequencer, and you just start fiddling with your synthesizers, sometimes those sequences can lead you down a rabbit hole, or they can lead to something really cool. And you know, it's like when you're using like a drum machine, like a TRS drum sequencer. This allows you to create things that maybe you physically couldn't play, but you can actually get the system or the sequencer to help you come up with a musical idea that might be even hard to play physically, but you can come up with it on these
oh,
machines.
definitely. Like sometimes I'll be in my door and I'll come with like a really great piano line and I'll put it into MIDI, and then I'll just stack piano lines on top of piano lines with overlapping ranges until like it's completely
Yeah,
impossible to play, like unless I had maybe 10 hands. But I totally get that. It's just there's so much
yeah,
flexibility with like digital mediums that sometimes you can't achieve with playing an actual
yeah.
instrument.
It's like the idea of like if you use like granular synthesis or your additive synthesis or subtractive synthesis. I'm a synthesizer guy, so if you go into something with granular synthesis, you go and you do a field recording of something like a bottle or noise, and then you turn it into a pad. and then you could actually sample it, tear it apart, and then kind of have like, different parts of it, different frequencies crashing into each other or having things go backwards or forwards or inside out. And that's kind of the nature of experimental electronic music. We just try to deconstruct everything. You take something and then you try to tear it apart.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
And try to get something musical out of it. But the fun is kind of taking something simple and then making it more complex, or something complex and make it more simple, or doing different grades of shades of gray in that.
Oh, that's definitely where the best ideas come from.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Brian Eno. I still am. That type of production. If you look at George Martin, Brian Eno, looking at bands like Sun Ra, and Lou Reed, the simplicity of the stuff he did, is just like how I tend to go after certain elements of music. So like you're talking about Bjork, and you talked about some of the other your influences. So when you go into a song, do you particularly just let it kind of come from the muse, or do you say, well, I want to do something that sounds like this, or you just kind of, the song just comes to you, you don't really, maybe it ends up sounding like something because you have influences and you kind of subconsciously pull them in? Or do you specifically say, I want to do this, like this type of style, or do you just kind of find you?
I'd like to think that I find me, but sometimes I'll end up writing songs, and then like I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up and I'll listen back to it. It's like, oh my god, I just completely copied that artist. What am I doing? Um, but yeah, most of the time I just try to like I enjoy being influenced by like other musicians and sounds as well. But I think when it comes to my music, I have to like stop listening to like other music for a while I'm making that song, and just focus on what I think sounds cool and what I think really speaks to the song.
Yeah, cause I like a lot of the tracks on "Eye of the Cauldron of the
Oh,
Morning,"
thank you.
because a lot of those have that kind of Susanna Vega feel, which you haven't heard her, but the way that those songs kind of go together, and the sound of them has that kind of college radio indie songwriter thing that was going on back then. There was a lot of female indie songwriters between like Liz Phair and Juliana Hatfield, Tori Amos. There's this whole, when I was, in that period of time, there was all these great female singer-songwriters, and they were challenging, the whole iconic thing of like, oh, Dylan. Everybody's got to be like Dylan. Everybody's got to be like Springsteen. Everybody's got to be like, Paul and John Lennon. And then all these great female singer-songwriters that are coming around, and I've been really keying into a lot of the work that they've done for, Sleater Kinney. There's like really awesome, Liz Phair. I was totally caught up in Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville. I don't know if you ever gotten to her, but she was just a really interesting songwriter, and she had this kind of strategy that, you could kind of don't have to be pitch perfect. You don't have to be Mariah Carey. You don't have to be Whitney Houston. You can be like Dylan. You don't have to have the most, perfect voice, but the honesty of being a singer-songwriter in your content will drive people because of what you're saying and what you're
That's
singing.
such a good message.
Yeah, I've always been kind of, the top 10 kind of dictates people have to have 5-octave voices. They have to have pitch perfect voices. They've got to be the perfectness. But I've always been drawn to the imperfections and the happy accidents of like classic music. If you go back and listen to like progressive bands like Yes and Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, it's the nature of the happy accidents that caused some of the greatest songs that ever be written, or because people weren't trying to make them perfect.
Totally. Like I think that's something that's really being overlooked nowadays, especially with like the rise in like the accessibility of music software and things like auto-tune, where like especially in charts, like everyone is like so conditioned to sounding perfect that like it's so easy now to just get rid of that, the imperfections that sort of make music what it is.
Yeah, because I was working on a project and I kind of decided that I wasn't going to work on it anymore and the person's goal was to, every time I brought them something that was kind of really experimental or kind of like doing something a little off kilter just to be a little, different, they were trying to get me to do it like exactly like something that's in the top 50. And after a while, I'm like, that's not really me. And you can commercially make money if you choose to do that, but I don't necessarily. I want my art to sound a certain way, and if I put myself on a project, I want to bring that to the table. And if somebody basically wants to put me into a different category and make all my stuff become not the way I would do it, then I'm like, well, you need somebody else, because like you picked me because I have this sound, and now you want me to sound like somebody else.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, there's so many artists that, like, I guess they get forced into doing that and they do it. But I always been drawn to indie artists that have that kind of, that honesty of what you're doing, like what you did with Eye in the Cauldron of the Morning. That's what I live for, finding artists that do work like that. That's the kind of work I like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, like coming from, like, because I'm studying music at the moment in uni, like songwriting specifically. So a lot of the times, like, we'll get different briefs, like, oh, you need to write in this very specific style. And you'll have producers come in saying, oh, it needs to be really polished and perfect. And, like, I could do that. But then part of me is also like, that's not true to my songwriting style, even if I am writing for other people. So I always try and off kilter that somehow. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is, you want to get published, you want to work with people. There's a certain, like, I guess I got a certain role. I've worked with artists that have heard the way I sound, and they want what I'm doing to bring it to the table. And I understand, well, okay, something doesn't work because it doesn't work, right? But if they're still willing to hear, like, maybe you give them 7 takes and the 5th take is in the style you want, but it actually finally locks into what they were doing. And that's a matter of just, like, syncing up with somebody and doing it. But it's not like they're going to say, well, go and sound like Glenn Frey or go and sound like Madonna or go sound like, so it's like, well, I don't want to do that. So yeah, it's like kind of a balancing act, but within any kind of band, it's just a matter of like locking in with people. And it's really hard because most of my collaborations have been long distance. And I used to, like, back in the 70s and the 80s, you could go in the studio and you could just be in the studio and get it because you're with them. You're physically there. A lot of projects I've done, you have to keep on sending multiple versions of things because it can't be physically in the same space. It's not impossible, but it's like it takes a lot longer than if I was actually
definitely
there.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about collaborating and, like, getting to meet the person while you're making the music, because I think that while it's great that social media has allowed so many different musicians from across the world to connect, I think there's something quite distant at the same time, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the only way I solved it, I actually started having, like, Skype and Zoom meetings, and then in those real-time meetings actually have my hardware hooked up so I could, like, well, here's a bass line, do you like it? So I could get immediate feedback.
That's great.
Right. And it's like doing that, he's like, well, okay, I've always wanted somebody to build an Ableton type DAW that could allow you to real-time record with somebody, right? So if you're in your Ableton and you're there in their Ableton, you could collaborate in real time.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I think that would change music to be more like when you're, Fleetwood Mac were in, Sound City, and they were kind of working things out. They were able to, like, oh, I'm hearing this piano line coming from the piano player, and suddenly the drummer changes what they're doing because of what the chord progression is, and that is hard to happen sequentially. You kind of have to happen in real time. And if you could have a DAW that does that, I'm an IT guy. I've been proposing this for a long time, but it's, I think, in this kind of age with Corona, and even because of the distance of people doing these long distance collaborations, that would be like a really amazing thing to have that I think that would really bring a new age of music if people could do that.
Oh, definitely. That sounds like a $1 million idea.
Yeah, yeah. I've been trying to get it done, but nobody seems to be as interested in it because I think people would want to do it, but it's like there's a lot of issues with latency and the way the internet works and all kinds of other things would have to get solved. Maybe 5G might solve more of it, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to see what do you think of one of the questions I always ask about streaming services. I mean, because we're able to talk because of these type of services. But as a musician, how do you feel about the Spotify's and Apple Musics and titles? And what are your feelings about the advantages and the disadvantages of these systems?
Well, I think it's quite bittersweet because on the one hand, like the whole idea of streaming is amazing, and I wouldn't have like the taste in music that I have now. Like I'd still probably like be listening to like maybe a lot of the early indie stuff and like whatever was on the charts if it weren't for streaming. But I think it's there's something quite sad about it as well because like um I'm a big fan of the album as a format, and I think a lot of that has been overshadowed by like the sort of the push for singles and the push for like getting as many streams as possible in a single song. And I think yeah, something's been lost with that.
Yeah, I think the playlist, like age of the playlist, kind of reminds me of the '50s. Like in the '50s, everything was single oriented,
Mm.
right? Like everybody just had singles and 45s and 78s, and eventually their hits were compiled into albums that were kind of like didn't really have themes. They were just songs slapped together because they were hits.
Yeah.
um, they came from the singles, and it kind of feels like we're in that kind of age again. And the Beatles, they really brought the album format into focus because they started writing. Even if Sgt. Pepper's isn't really a coherent concept, it's just an album that flows. Um, and then you start getting bands that actually take that concept and, like the Pink Floyds of the world, the Yeses, the Genesis, everybody starts writing albums. And even like Carole King, Tapestry, you get albums that have themes, Dylan, all the great 70s albums. I grew up listening to vinyl. And the thing about vinyl that I loved is you buy the record and you go with a bunch of friends and you'd sit in the basement and you'd have to listen to the whole thing. And these albums in that age, they were worth listening to the whole thing. It was kind of like you needed to listen to not just to one song, you listened to the whole project. And I think that's been lost with this age of singles and playlists. People just string things that are not even related, and nobody wants to dive deep into anybody's project.
Yeah, I mean I think it's quite easy to also just generalize like the whole culture of like singles and playlists because there are a lot of indie artists who still stick by like the whole
Oh yeah,
album format. But I think
yeah.
it's just like the lines are becoming a lot more blurred now as to what's gonna be more successful for an artist's career.
Well, all the indie artists that I talked to in the last years have been really focused on the album format. And within the
Mm.
indie kind of college radio community that I interview, that's where everybody is. Everybody I've talked to, that's where they are. It just seems like mainstream in some genres. It seems like albums, like if you look at hip hop, you look at like guys like Tyler the Creator, you look at Kendrick Lamar, you look at certain hip hop oriented bands, they have full album concepts. People are willing to listen to Kendrick Lamar's whole project all the way through, or
Oh,
Tyler the
totally.
Creator's project all the way through, or Brockhampton's project all the way through. It just seems like in the rock genre, it's kind of dropped off.
Yeah.
In certain genres, it's dropped off. Where certain like if within our indie kind of alternative space, it's always been that way. And most people are into buying a album from a band, listen to the whole record. It's just in different aspects of the industry, hoping for more of a wave where you get like a popular artist that does like a Sgt. Pepper level work. And I guess you could say Kendrick Lamar did that. Well, it was just a different genre.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, there's also upsides to the whole single format as well, and like, I wouldn't like have heard of a lot of different artists if I hadn't heard of like a smash hit that they had. But obviously, to each their own.
Yeah, this is the whole kind of thing when music television kind of came around. When I was like, when people used to actually play videos, it kind of brought in focus like the one-hit wonders of the new wave era. You know, you had bands like Duran Duran that were able to do multiple, hits, and Depeche Mode's of the world, they did multiple hits, but there were tons of bands that just had one song, you know, and it just had one video or one song or two songs, and that's it. So it was kind of like, in music television was like the streaming of our era of that time. Is like you would hear all these different bands and their hits, and you would get drawn into it. But the difference then is it led you to go to the record store and you still had to buy a CD. So even to get that one song, you had to buy the whole record. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of hurt musicians is the financial aspect of streaming is a lot of times people don't even download the album. They just stream the song. They don't buy the record. They maybe will buy the T-shirt or the poster before they buy the album. And one thing I've always asked is like, okay, kids are willing to buy a $60 Xbox game, but they won't buy a $10 CD from a band that they say they love, unless they go to the concert and maybe get an autograph one. So I think the different strategies for musicians in this time is like we have to find other sources of income. We have to tour, we have to do merch, we have to do sync licensing. So when we go to that strategy, like as a musician, are you thinking that you have to put money into things that are other than direct music to actually make it as a working musician?
I mean, right now I'm quite focused on just getting my music out there and making sure that it's to the level I want it. But I think it's good that we've become a bit less dependent. I mean, obviously, it's quite sad that a part of that has sort of really ruined the music industry, but I think it's also good that we're sort of being forced to diversify the ways in which the music industry makes money, because I think that at the end of the day, like, we're not too relying on one segment of the industry in case that ever collapses again.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting now is it used to be with the old industry structure, you get signed, you get an advance, you have to pay back that advance. They gave you tour support, but if after 2 or 3 albums you didn't make back that money on the advance, you were done in the industry, and you couldn't really work anymore. You were done. You owed money. You couldn't even continue because you didn't have the money. So what I see today is because bands don't get, most bands are indie, a lot of bands are independent, they can operate and they can continue to work where in a normal record label, you would not continue to get support. And so people are able to continue their projects longer than what people used to be able to do.
Oh, definitely. And like the
So
fact that we have other ways to sort of support ourselves as artists, I think that's incredible.
yeah, I just think that you have an artist that, it used to be that if you didn't break like 200,000, 300,000 copies of a record all the time, your label would drop you. And you got artists that can live at 60,000, 40,000. If they continually tour around the world, they don't have to get the big numbers because they can make a living doing what they love. And I think that's really that's always been very interesting to me. That that's a different world.
Definitely, yeah.
So, like in terms of what's going on with the coronavirus in the industry where you are right now, are you getting you're in school, but are you getting resources? Are musicians getting any kind of resources because of the crisis, or everybody's getting the same level of resources? Do you have like is the government or social programs helping musicians where you are?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, since most musicians identify as freelancers, like here in the UK, we're sort of just we're not the priority, if that makes sense. Like there are a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
like you've got these big companies with like hundreds and hundreds of employees who obviously need attention, and then you've also got the small businesses as well. And then because as musicians we're paid like probably like gig to gig, project to project most of the time. We're not we're sort of
yeah,
overlooked.
yeah. We're gig workers, freelance workers. It's hard to get support. There's a lot of organizations like in the U.S. that are trying to put together different funding, um, organizations to support the workers. Because like in our industry, what really got hit is like all the festivals that got canceled, all the the riggers, all the engineers, all the guys running the boards, all the roadies, the truck drivers. Like they had all this stuff booked. They were going to have like income for the whole year, and now it's nothing.
It's gone.
Yeah,
It's
and it's
actually
like
terrible.
it's yeah, and there's venues in New York and Boston and places, and I'm in the Northeast. They're closing now. We don't know if they're going to come back. So that's a whole nother thing. Is like, okay, well, if these venues don't get supported, like, where are we going to play? you know.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like this. I mean, it's the last thing on some people's minds. I mean, they love music. They come to music, but sometimes they don't think about what it takes to support artists. And that's been kind of like the rub is like, okay, maybe we shouldn't talk about it, but like it is something that people say they love, but then do they really support it?
Yeah, that's something I found whilst sort of just like coming into the whole music industry scene. It's like a lot more work goes into getting like music to your ears than you would ever anticipate from like people behind the scenes, like producing and mixing and mastering and recording engineers and all that, to the actual musicians themselves, to like you said, roadies and stage managers and just everyone really. And it's just been a massive blow.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like it's a whole big, structure, and the artists that still have their contracts under contracted artists, they got their advances. They have a little more cushion than everybody that went indie. And so now we're like, oh, that was a good idea as long as you could work.
Yeah.
But I think people are just finding new ways to get the word out. I've tried to do this show and get people to hear new artists. And I'm a musician myself, and I take time to do this because this is another way for me to do something. um, and it just is a good way to talk to other musicians and see what the pulse is. To see what's going on.
Oh, definitely.
Because I love being able to have that kind of connection to musicians worldwide, and this technology allows me. I've talked to bands in the Netherlands and Australia and Tokyo and Germany, and it's just interesting. All musicians have the same struggles, no matter what country they're in. It's the same thing. And musicians do music because they love music. Most musicians will do a gig whether they get paid for it or not, just to get the exposure, just to get to where they want to be, get the experience of playing with other people. Is a different type of a career. It's not like a banker, Not to put down a banker because I've actually done that kind of work, but it's just a different thing. I feel more satisfied, playing a gig as a keyboardist than I do working on a actuarial spreadsheet.
Oh, totally. I mean, with the
Yeah,
whole like pursuing music career, because before I didn't even really consider music as a career until like my songwriting started like getting attention. But before that, like I had like a steady like 5-year plan set. So then when I did make the switch, it was kind of like everything was so much scarier. But at the same time, everything has been 10 times more fulfilling because of it. Because like I know that every day I'm taking a risk, but every day like I know it's worth it.
Yeah, well, like you're your own master of your destiny. You know, as a musician, you're art. You know, it's the life of an artist. My daughter's like, you know, is a painter,
Oh,
illustrator.
that's great.
You know, she does like gig work. She just got like accepted for a gallery show in
Oh,
Barcelona.
congratulations.
Yeah, and so she does a lot of cool work. She got online stuff, you know, and it's the life of an artist. People are like, they were, you know, people in my family are like, well, that's how are you going to sustain that? It's like, well, you know, that's your dream. If you're an artist, you're a painter or musician or an
You'll
actor,
find a way.
it's not, yeah, it's not like, okay, well, it's not like I go to this building 9 to 5 and I got this steady, dependable thing, right?
Mm.
And everybody thinks that's what you should do. But if you're an artist, people start questioning. They're like, well, how are you going to make money? Or how are you going to do this? It's like, well, you know, if you have a passion, you know, you have to take a risk.
Definitely.
And I think there's the nature of art. Some people can't get it. They're like, oh, I couldn't do that. But yeah, it's just interesting. You know, that people who are that passionate about something. I always find I'm drawn to creative people because of that drive.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's always.
So,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say there's like obviously like working in a 9 to 5 job. There's a lot of security and a lot of.
Well, a lot of us have a day gig or
Oh,
a side
definitely.
gig or another gig because that's the nature of being a musician. You always have to have something.
Yeah. Music's
I've
expensive.
got a couple. Yeah, I've got. I mean, just to be able to get my gear as an electronic musician, you know, I'm an IT worker, and so I can get my Moogs. You know, so you know, and I know guitar players that were like working for like moving companies, or they're waiters, or they're Uber drivers, or they're do something, you know, because they got to get that $3,000, $4,000 guitar,
Mm.
and you know nobody's gonna buy it for them. They got to get it, and that's the nature of like most artists. They got to buy their instrument. They got to buy some gear. Or they got to pay to get to the gig before they get paid. um, so it's always that we have to have some kind of source of money to even, you know, play in the game. Um, it just would be cool if there was a world that would appreciate us in a way to, you know, give us a more stability without having to take as much risk. But you know, we'll take the risk anyway.
Yeah.
So your new project it's kind of like, are you kind of dependent on working with a bunch of people you can't get to? You got to wait till you can get to the resources, or are you kind of rethinking how you're constructing your project?
Well, a bit of both really. So I've been having a lot of online talks with my team, or I say my team, I mean my friends, to sort of
Yeah.
try and finish the album. But then also I've been sort of doing a lot more than I would have like on my own to try and sort of rearrange things so that I can actually get my stuff out there.
Yeah, so you're learning how to get into your DAW at a deeper level than you probably would have if you could have gone with a recording engineer or a studio.
Yeah, definitely. I've gotten a lot more into production, and I've had to buy a lot more equipment now so I can sort of like properly have a home studio, so I can.
Oh, so you're investing with better
Yeah,
microphones, better
yeah,
preamps, better like USB processing to like connect other instruments. You know, that's the nature. Like, I think it's going to force more musicians to really try to
their home
build
studios.
home studios out. You know, I've gone and invested in more condenser mics, more preamps, you know, more tools for mastering. You know, I've got like 3 or 4 mastering tools now that I got just because if you're an electronic musician, if you got these Moogs and stuff, it's like because you already got the sound creation machine, it's just a matter of tightening up the processing of it. And once you have it, then you're just like, okay, well, I can have my 808 go into a better processor or a better effect system, and then I get a really good sound. If I can tighten it up on the recording, then I don't have to spend $300 or $500, $1,000 for somebody to master it. I can kind of do most of it myself. And so I think a lot of people are looking at the different solutions out there, and they're getting cheaper all the time. They're getting more capable.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So when you go to school, how much of your schooling is music theory, and how much of it is actually recording processing and like recording engineering?
Well, I go to school for songwriting, so because I already have a classical background, a lot of it isn't theory, but more, I'd say, musicology, if anything. And then,
Okay, like
yeah,
history.
yeah, and sort of like a lot of philosophical statements about like the state of music, the music industry, and sort of where music is headed. And then we also have like modules on like the music industry itself and like making sure we're all clued up as musicians on our legal rights and all that jazz. And then when it comes to the actual making music part, we've got practical modules where we're like collaborating with a load of other students who are also musicians, and then also like the more like theoretical part, like you mentioned, which is breaking down a song and seeing which components work and which parts don't, and sort of figuring out how we can apply that to our own work. So it's quite a mixed bag, which is quite fun actually.
Oh yeah, you're getting into the theory. Like that's, you know, like as a synthesist, I'm always looking at, you know, additive synthesis versus granular synthesis versus subtractive synthesis. And it's kind of like in the world today, like, you know, the initial world of synthesized array was a subtractive synthesis. It was like the Moog style. Then people got into the Buchla style, which is the additive synthesis. Now today, everybody's into granular synthesis. But like the reality is, like, it's all sound design uses like all of these elements, and you kind of use all of them at any time, you know, depending on what you want to do and what you're trying to bring into the table. So like sometimes an analog synthesizer makes sense. Sometimes like a PCM sample makes sense, or granular sample, or a digital, fully digital synth makes sense because of what you're trying to service the song. You know, and that's what I found as I get older. Like people were like, "Oh, I'm a punk rocker. I'm only going to be punk rock, and I can't look at anything else." Or I'm a new waver. I'm never going to get out of new wave. I think what today seems like to me is like you got to mix genres, mix musical theories, and kind of come up with like new things by not being so rigid.
Yeah, I mean, with the way that music is now, like a lot of stuff has already been done. So if you want to be noticed, like you have to do something different, and a lot of the times that's from blending genres. Like if you take an artist like 21 Pilots, like they blew up on the sort of indie pop scene, indie pop rock scene.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was because like they didn't have like a main defining genre. They were dipping their toes everywhere, and people loved that. So I think that a lot of musicians are having to be a lot more creative about like sort of how they define their sound now.
Yeah, I've always been drawn to bands like a Radiohead,
I love Radiohead.
or like, you know, yeah, just because of the experimentation. I mean, I've seen them on stage, and the guys are like playing with their modular synthesizers live, like repatching them live, you know, and just the way Tom York, you know, seems to just like do these very kind of stream of consciousness. Though he has a roadmap and you know what he's doing, but it seems like all their songs are kind of created from like a jazz fusion type of structure. That's electronic and progressive and all over the place. And I've always been drawn to band like Wilco, you know, anybody that takes like progressive, because progressive nature of progressive music is you're going to mix everything. You can have classical, you can have jazz, you can have folk, you can have rock, you can have anything. So you could be expansive in your sound, and you're not kind of locked in. Nobody knows which way they're going to go with their next record, because they could go this way, they could go that way. It's not, you know, the unexpected is what's expected.
And we love it for that.
Yeah, I see more and more bands like, you know, are taking that approach, where they're not just, okay, you know, there was a time where you had the heavy metal bands like the Rats and the Motley Crues and the Van Halens, and that was like that's rock music. And now you got bands like 21 Pilots, but that's kind of changing the nature. It doesn't have to be heavy metal, death metal, whatever. It can be whatever it needs to be.
Totally, yeah.
So your new project, do you feel you're going to have it done by the end of this year, or is it going to creep into 2021?
Well, if anything, I'm going to make sure that it ends this year, if anything.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you think you'll be able to schedule gigs in a stable way more at that fourth quarter of this year, or more like
It'll probably have
2021?
to be 2021, to be honest.
Yeah, so I hear a lot of artists are saying that. I mean, they want it to happen fourth quarter, but they're not sure. So you just kind of take where you can go. You know, it's kind of dependent. We're kind of dependent on the venues being allowed to
Yeah, that's
open.
very true. And I think that, like, a part of me is very scared that a lot more people are going to be quite reluctant to also go to gigs and concerts now because of this whole situation, which is,
Yeah, I think our industry is not going to fully stabilize
for a while.
until we actually have a vaccine and we have antivirals. Then you'll get back to pre-virus level. I think before, people aren't going to trust assistance at a venue with no antiviral and no vaccine. Some people will, but a lot of people won't. So I think the industry is kind of in a holding pattern until we can get that level of confidence.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know people probably want to hear that, but I work with like insurance companies and banks and people who do projections, and those are the kind of projections I see in my day to day. So that's not a good thing that artists probably want to hear, but that's kind of where it's going.
Yeah. I mean, in a situation like this, it's good to be realistic about what to expect in the coming year.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. But I've been doubling down on writing, and I think a lot of artists like yourself, you're doing a lot of you're working on your craft. And I think I've talked to artists. They're like, okay, I'm a guitar player. I always wanted to pick up the bass. I'm going to go and learn the bass because I got time. Or I'm going to double down on trying to tighten up my understanding of chords and learn more chords. How to use them. So I'm just talking to all kinds of artists. Okay, I'm going to double down on my craft. Lyricists, I'm going to spend a lot of time reading and writing and tightening things up. So you can do that, or you can stream. Just go and stream Netflix. Or you can go and double down on I'm going to read some Wordsworth and try to integrate it into my lyrics.
Totally. I mean, everyone's got their own way of dealing with the crisis.
Yeah. I mean, you can't do it all the time. He's if you got to binge watch Netflix or whatever to kind of relax, it's cool. But we do have time, and as artists, to hone our craft. Where a lot of us were on the road so much that they couldn't do that. So you can take this time and you can actually, hone on your engineering, hone on your practicing for different styles that maybe you weren't fully comfortable with, but you wanted to dive into it. And I think there's an opportunity to take the time and not just say, well, I'm in prison because I'm locked down, or kind of use it to bring some rigor to your capability.
Oh, definitely. I think that's been one of the biggest silver linings to this whole situation. And just online seeing all these people who have maybe never picked up an instrument, or people who have sort of just been in a rut because they haven't had time. It's great seeing them all try and use that creative energy now.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, I've been hearing a lot of great music coming out from the artists that have been in this situation, putting out some really good stuff where it's making them maybe think about, because we're in such a critical time, it's changing the nature of the content of what they create. And artists have always kind of reflected their surroundings or their time. And so I think there's going to be a lot of great music coming out of this time, even though it's like a tragic time. People, when they get stressed, singer-songwriters tend to write some of their best work from the bad scenario.
Oh, I totally get that. I totally do.
Yeah. So maybe the last question, like when you write your music, do you feel that you write your best song from like being happy as a person, or do you write your best song by being not as happy?
Well, I like to think it's because I'm happy, but most of the time, like I like looking at my track record, the best stuff I've written is when I've been absolutely miserable. Because there's just
Yeah.
so much
Yeah.
material.
You're in, yeah, you're in that
Yeah.
checkbox. Almost everybody I talk to that's a songwriter tends to say what you said, that their best work comes from pain or from the things that they experience that aren't the best times of their life. I've sometimes created their greatest opportunities as artists. Um, and I think the cool thing about being a musician is the fact that you can take that kind of internal pain that we feel as human beings, and you make it so other people can get through their day because you put it into words or music.
Oh, definitely.
And I think that helps everyone. They are able to find a way to cope because of their favorite
Yeah. I
song
mean, there's something
or their favorite art.
so therapeutic about the act of songwriting that I think when we do get into these painful situations, like sometimes just getting words down and sort of defining like the situation you're in is can be so can just be like a massive relief in some sense.
Yeah, it's very cathartic. My songwriting has saved me a lot of money with my therapist. I probably saved a lot of money on diving into projects where I really, looked at what was going on. I looked deep at, sometimes as a songwriter, you kind of got to be very
Reflective.
self-aware. Yeah, self-aware and understand like your ego and your id, not to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but it helps when you understand kind of those dynamics, and then you can, whether you understand, but sometimes like it's know how to take the feeling and translate it into sound, or translate it into words. And I think that's what musicians, we have that
It's what we do best.
capacity to do that. Yeah. So I thank you for being on, Yvonne. I'm going to put all the links that I have to all your work, and I'm not going to use that photograph that I have to get the release for, but I did find some I can use. There's nobody else I have to worry about with the photos you sent me,
Awesome.
right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Yes. In an hour, the links will be out there. We're on 11 platforms on the net, including Google Play, Spotify, Apple, and Anchor itself. And so all these links will be out there. We're also going to put it on our Instagram page with a highlight that will go right to the Spotify version of this podcast. That's one cool thing, that we have that ability. So within Instagram, if we put a highlight up of this podcast, it will go directly to the Spotify version of the podcast, which is free. You don't have to be a Spotify member to listen to their podcast. So all your friends that don't have Spotify can still listen to the podcast there.
That's awesome.
So thank you for being on the show. And once you have your next project ready to go, feel free to contact us, and we'll talk about your next project.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You too.